In the peaceful suburbs of a bustling coastal city, where luxury homes dotted the hillside like pearls on a string, lived a successful businessman named Robert Chen. His modern glass and steel mansion stood as a testament to his achievements, but behind its pristine walls lay a story of profound loneliness and hope. Robert hadn't always lived alone with his son. 3 years ago, his wife Linda had passed away after a brief but fierce battle with cancer, leaving him to raise their 8-year-old son, Tommy, by himself. Tommy, a bright and usually cheerful child, had inherited his mother's gentle spirit and her unfortunate health challenges. He suffered from a rare autoimmune condition that often left him too weak to attend school regularly. Running a multinational company while caring for a sick child proved to be an overwhelming challenge for Robert. His days became an endless juggle between board meetings and doctor's appointments, conference calls and medication schedules. The guilt of not being there enough for Tommy ate at him constantly, especially when he'd return home late to find his son already asleep, attended to by temporary caregivers who seemed to rotate through their lives like seasons. "I need someone permanent," Robert thought one evening, watching Tommy push his dinner around his plate listlessly. "Someone who can be here consistently, who can give him the care and attention he deserves." The decision to hire a full-time nanny wasn't easy. Bringing a stranger into their home felt like a massive leap of faith, especially given Tommy's condition. After weeks of rigorous interviews and background checks, Robert finally found someone who seemed perfect. Mrs. Zhang, a middle-aged woman with 20 years of experience in childcare and a special certification in caring for children with medical needs, appeared to be the answer to his prayers. Her gentle demeanor and impressive references made her stand out among dozens of candidates. However, Robert wasn't taking any chances. Without Mrs. Zhang's knowledge, he had a sophisticated security system installed throughout the house, including hidden cameras in every room except the bathrooms and bedrooms. "It's just a precaution," he assured himself, trying to quiet the voice in his head that called him paranoid. Tommy's safety comes first. The first few weeks seemed to go smoothly. Mrs. Zhang arrived promptly each morning, prepared Tommy's medications with careful precision, and kept detailed logs of his daily activities and health status. Tommy's mood appeared to improve, and he even started showing more interest in his studies. Robert found himself breathing easier, feeling like he'd made the right choice. But then subtle changes began to surface. Tommy started having more bad days than usual. His appetite decreased, and dark circles appeared under his eyes. When Robert questioned Mrs. Zhang, she always had reasonable explanations: the weather changes, normal fluctuations in his condition, the stress of upcoming school tests. Her answers were detailed and professional, backed by the meticulous notes she kept. One evening, while reviewing the security footage from that day, something he did randomly to ensure everything was okay, Robert noticed something odd. The timestamp on Tommy's medication schedule didn't match the actual time shown in the footage. It was a small discrepancy, just 30 minutes, but it nagged at him. He began to dig deeper, reviewing more footage from previous days. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Mrs. Zhang's documentation showed one reality, but the cameras told a different story. She was adjusting the medication times, sometimes skipping doses entirely, and then backdating the logs. But why? What could she possibly gain from this? Robert's hands shook as he fast-forwarded through more footage. Then he saw something that made his heart stop. During Tommy's nap time, when she thought no one was watching, Mrs. Zhang would make phone calls in hushed Mandarin. Robert, who spoke the language fluently thanks to his Chinese heritage, could clearly understand her words. "Yes, the plan is working. The boy's condition is deteriorating exactly as expected. Soon his father will have no choice but to step down from the company." The truth hit Robert like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Tommy's care, this was corporate sabotage of the most heinous kind. Someone had planted Mrs. Zhang in his home, using his son's vulnerability as a weapon against him. The realization that he had unwittingly invited this threat into his home, that his own paranoia about installing cameras had actually saved them, left him reeling. But Robert couldn't confront Mrs. Zhang immediately. He needed to be smart about this, to gather enough evidence to ensure she and whoever was behind this would face justice. More importantly, he needed to protect Tommy without tipping his hand. One wrong move could put his son in even greater danger. As he sat in his home office that night, watching the current live feed of Mrs. Zhang reading Tommy a bedtime story, acting every bit the caring nanny while likely plotting their downfall, Robert began to formulate a plan. He would need help, but he had to choose his allies carefully. The stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't just about his company anymore, this was about his son's life. The security footage continued to roll on his screen, showing Mrs. Zhang tucking Tommy in with a gentle smile. The same hands that adjusted his blanket had also tampered with his medication. The same voice that sang him lullabies had plotted against his health in secret phone calls. The contrast made Robert's stomach turn, but he forced himself to keep watching. Tomorrow would begin a careful game of cat and mouse, and he couldn't afford to miss a single detail. As he closed his laptop for the night, Robert glanced at the family photo on his desk, himself, Linda, and a healthy, smiling Tommy. "I promise," he whispered to his late wife's image, "I'll fix this. No one will ever hurt our son again." The hidden cameras continued their silent vigil as night fell over the house, recording every moment of what would soon become a dangerous game of deception and discovery. Dawn painted the sky in soft pastels as Robert prepared for the most challenging performance of his life. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors of his kitchen. He had spent the night planning, his father's old wisdom echoing in his mind: in business and in life, patience is not just a virtue, it's a weapon. Today, he would begin his careful counterplay. As he heard Mrs. Zhang's car pull into the driveway, right on schedule at 7 a.m., he straightened his tie and took a deep breath. The security footage from the previous night was safely backed up in 3 different locations. Now, the real work would begin. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," Mrs. Zhang called out cheerfully as she entered, her sensible shoes clicking against the floor. Her gray hair was neatly tied back, her clothes practical and clean. Looking at her, no one would suspect the darkness that lurked behind her grandmother-like appearance. "Tommy had a peaceful night. I checked on him when I came in." Robert forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Zhang. You're always so thorough." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but he maintained his composure. "I have an early meeting today. Will you be alright managing Tommy's new treatment schedule?" A flicker of something, surprise? Concern? Crossed Mrs. Zhang's face. "New treatment schedule?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes, didn't the doctor's office call you? They left a message yesterday about adjusting his medication timing." Robert watched her reaction closely, noting how her fingers tightened slightly on her handbag. "No, they didn't call me," she replied, her cheerful demeanor never wavering. "But I'm sure we can get that sorted out. Would you like me to call them?" "No need," Robert said smoothly, pulling out a fake prescription schedule he had created the night before. "I have it right here. The doctor believes this new timing might help with his energy levels." He handed her the paper, watching as she studied it with what appeared to be genuine professional interest. But the hidden cameras caught what the naked eye missed: the slight tremor in her hands, the quick glance at her phone, the way she shifted her weight as if suddenly uncomfortable. Robert had laid the first trap, and she had walked right into it. Throughout the day, Robert monitored the security feeds from his office. Mrs. Zhang made 3 phone calls while Tommy napped, each one more frantic than the last. Though she spoke in hushed Mandarin, Robert could clearly understand her concerns. "The schedule has changed." "No, I wasn't informed." This could complicate everything. Meanwhile, Robert had set another plan in motion. His most trusted security expert, Officer Chen, no relation, had begun a deep background check into Mrs. Zhang's references. The preliminary results were disturbing. Each reference was legitimate on the surface but had been carefully constructed within the last year. The real Mrs. Zhang, it seemed, had an entirely different history. As evening approached, Robert received a text from Tommy's actual doctor, Dr. Patel, confirming that she had secretly examined Tommy that morning before Mrs. Zhang arrived. The diagnosis confirmed his worst fears. Tommy's condition was deteriorating due to subtle but systematic medication mismanagement. Robert's hands gripped his desk until his knuckles turned white. The proof was mounting, but he needed more. He needed to know who was behind this elaborate scheme, who would go so far as to harm an innocent child to achieve their corporate goals. That evening, as Robert drove home, the setting sun cast long shadows across the city. The golden light reminded him of evenings spent with Linda, when they would sit on their balcony and dream about Tommy's future. Those dreams now hung by a thread, threatened by invisible enemies who had invaded the sanctuary of his home. Walking through his front door, Robert found Tommy and Mrs. Zhang in the kitchen. The scene appeared picture-perfect, Tommy attempting to do his homework while Mrs. Zhang prepared dinner, humming softly. The security cameras captured it all, the gentle pat she gave Tommy's head, the way she checked his temperature with seemingly genuine concern, the careful measuring of his evening medications. "Daddy!" Tommy called out, his voice weaker than it had been just weeks ago. "Mrs. Zhang is making soup. She says it's good for my strength." Robert hugged his son, feeling the slight fever that Mrs. Zhang had forgotten to mention in her daily report. "That's wonderful, buddy. How about you go wash up while I talk to Mrs. Zhang about tomorrow's schedule?" As Tommy left the kitchen, Robert noticed Mrs. Zhang quickly slip something into her pocket. A phone? A note? The cameras would tell him later. For now, he had to maintain the charade. "Mrs. Zhang," he began, keeping his voice steady, "I've been thinking about taking some time off work next week to spend with Tommy. Perhaps we could discuss reducing your hours temporarily?" The flash of panic in her eyes was quick but unmistakable. "Oh, but Mr. Chen, Tommy's routine is so important right now. Any disruption could affect his progress." Her words were caring, concerned, perfect, and completely false. "Yes, you're right," Robert conceded, watching as relief softened her features. "Perhaps another time." That night, after Mrs. Zhang left and Tommy was asleep, Robert reviewed the kitchen footage. The object she had pocketed was a small notebook. Frame by frame, he watched as she wrote something just before he arrived home. The camera angle wasn't ideal, but with some enhancement, he could make out a phone number, one with an international prefix he recognized from his business dealings. As midnight approached, Robert sat in his study, surrounded by the soft glow of multiple screens showing different parts of his house. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new deceptions, new chances to gather evidence. But tonight, watching Tommy sleep peacefully on the security monitor, Robert allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He picked up Linda's photograph, tracing her smile with his finger. "I let danger into our home," he whispered to her image. "But I swear, I'll find out who's behind this. And when I do..." He left the thought unfinished, but the determination in his eyes said everything. The night grew deeper, and somewhere in the city, phones rang and plans were adjusted. The game was changing, though only one player knew it. Tomorrow would bring another day of calculated moves and counter-moves, each side believing they held the upper hand. But for now, in the quiet of night, a father watched over his son through digital eyes, planning his next move in a game where the stakes were literally life and death. Morning mist clung to the garden as Robert reviewed the latest findings from his investigation. The koi pond reflected the rose-gold sunrise, its surface occasionally broken by the lazy movement of ornamental fish, a peaceful scene that belied the storm brewing within the household's walls. His laptop displayed a series of documents that Officer Chen had sent over at dawn, each one more troubling than the last. The woman they knew as Mrs. Zhang had 5 different identities across 3 countries. Her real name was Ming Wei, and she had connections to a shadowy consulting firm that specialized in corporate takeovers, both legal and otherwise. But most disturbing was her association with Robert's largest business rival, Sun Tech Industries, a company that had been trying to acquire Robert's firm for the past 2 years. A soft knock at his study door snapped Robert from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, quickly minimizing the windows on his screen. Mrs. Zhang entered, carrying his morning coffee, a routine she had started 3 weeks ago. "Your coffee, Mr. Chen," she said with a warm smile. "And Tommy's fever broke during the night. He's feeling much better this morning." Robert accepted the coffee but didn't drink it. Instead, he watched as she adjusted the curtains, her movements efficient and practiced. "That's wonderful news," he replied, noticing how she glanced briefly at his laptop. "I was thinking of taking Tommy to the park today, since he's feeling better." A shadow of concern crossed her face. "Oh, but Mr. Chen, even though his fever has broken, he should rest. Perhaps another day would be better?" Her voice carried just the right amount of professional worry, but Robert caught the underlying tension. "You're probably right," he conceded, watching her shoulders relax slightly. "By the way, I've been meaning to ask, where did you say you worked before this?" "The Wilsons, wasn't it?" "Yes, for 3 years," she answered smoothly. "Until they relocated to Europe." Robert nodded, knowing full well that the Wilsons she referred to didn't exist. The coffee sat untouched on his desk, steam rising in lazy spirals. "Tommy speaks very highly of you," he said, maintaining the charade. "He says you remind him of his grandmother." Something flickered in Mrs. Zhang's eyes. Was it guilt? For a moment, Robert saw her mask slip, revealing a hint of genuine emotion. But it was gone so quickly he might have imagined it. "He's a special child," she replied softly. "He deserves the best care possible." After she left the study, Robert pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Dr. Patel. Within minutes, he received the results of the coffee analysis from yesterday, traces of a mild sedative, not enough to cause serious harm, but sufficient to make him less alert, less likely to notice small discrepancies in Tommy's care. The morning progressed with its usual routine. Through the hidden cameras, Robert watched as Mrs. Zhang went about her duties. She helped Tommy with his breakfast, administered his medications, still incorrectly, despite the new schedule, and settled him in for his morning studies. Every action was performed with seeming devotion and care. But today was different. Today, Robert had arranged for a special delivery, a package from a pharmaceutical company containing what appeared to be a new experimental treatment for Tommy's condition. In reality, it was a carefully crafted prop, part of his plan to force Mrs. Zhang's hand. The delivery arrived at precisely 11 a.m. Robert signed for it personally, making sure Mrs. Zhang saw him place it in the medicine cabinet. Through the cameras, he observed her reaction when she thought no one was watching, the rapid phone call in Mandarin, the hasty photographs of the package labels, the slight tremor in her hands as she reported to her unseen superiors. "They're sending new treatments without informing me," she whispered urgently into her phone. "This could ruin everything. We need to move faster." Robert had anticipated this response. The labels on the package contained coded information, a digital watermark that would trace anyone who photographed them. It was another thread in the web he was weaving around his son's would-be destroyers. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the house, Tommy asked for something unusual. He wanted to play in the garden. The first hints of autumn touched the trees outside the Chen residence, scattering golden leaves across the immaculate lawn. Robert stood at his bedroom window, watching the early morning light paint the world in amber hues. His phone buzzed quietly, a message from Officer Chen confirming that everything was in place. Today would change everything. The evidence they had gathered was overwhelming. Financial trails, fake identities, tampered medications, and recorded conversations, all pointing to a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Sun Tech Industries. But Robert had one final card to play, one last piece of evidence to collect before he could ensure not just justice, but Tommy's safety. Mrs. Zhang arrived at her usual time, the click of her sensible shoes echoing through the marble foyer. Today, she carried a small gift bag. For Tommy, she explained with a grandmother's smile. Just a little something to cheer him up. He's been so tired lately. Robert thanked her, his mask of gratitude firmly in place. Through the hidden cameras, he watched her place the bag in Tommy's room while his son still slept. The security system's new ultraviolet sensors, installed just days ago, immediately detected traces of the same compounds found in Tommy's blood work on the surface of the gift, a plush dragon toy. Mrs. Zhang, Robert called out, his voice carefully modulated. Could I speak with you in my study? There's something about Tommy's care I'd like to discuss. The study, with its wall of books and leather furnishings, had always been Robert's sanctuary. Now it felt like an interrogation room. Mrs. Zhang sat across from him, her posture perfect, hands folded neatly in her lap. Of course, Mr. Chen. Is everything all right? I received an interesting call yesterday, Robert began, watching her face with the attention of a man who had built his fortune reading people. From James Sun's office. Apparently, he's very interested in Tommy's condition. A flicker of something, fear? Surprise? Crossed her features before the calm mask returned. Oh. That's unexpected. Though I suppose Tommy's condition is quite rare. Indeed, Robert agreed, sliding a folder across his desk. Almost as rare as finding someone with 5 different identities across 3 countries. Wouldn't you agree, Ms. Ming Wei? The transformation was instant and chilling. Mrs. Zhang's grandmotherly demeanor vanished, replaced by something harder, more calculating. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Chen, she replied, but her hand trembled slightly as she pushed the folder away. The cameras see everything, Robert continued, turning his laptop to show her a compilation of footage, the tampered medications, the secret phone calls, the carefully orchestrated decline of Tommy's health. The question is, why? Why would someone like you, with your skills and experience, agree to harm an innocent child? For a long moment, silence filled the study. Outside, a breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. Finally, Mrs. Zhang, Ming Wei, spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't understand the pressure they put on people. The things they threaten to do. Tell me everything, Robert said, pressing a button under his desk that would signal Officer Chen and his team to move into position around the house. Not for me, but for Tommy. He trusted you. He called you his friend. Tears, real ones this time, gleamed in Ming Wei's eyes. They have my real grandson, she confessed, her composure cracking. In Beijing. They said if I didn't help them force you to sell your company, they would. She couldn't finish the sentence. Robert's mind raced. This was an angle they hadn't anticipated, another layer of victims in Sun Tech's elaborate scheme. We can help him, he said firmly. But first, you need to tell me everything. Every detail, every person involved. As Ming Wei began to talk, the hidden cameras recorded everything. She revealed a plot more intricate than even Robert had imagined. Sun Tech had spent years planning this takeover, identifying vulnerabilities, gathering intelligence. They had discovered Tommy's condition and saw an opportunity, but they needed someone with medical knowledge, someone they could control. The medications, she explained, her voice heavy with shame. They were designed to worsen his symptoms gradually. Nothing lethal, but enough to convince you that you couldn't handle both the company and a sick child. They predicted you would sell within 6 months. Robert's hands clenched into fists beneath his desk. And the gift you brought today? The final phase, she admitted. The toy is treated with compounds that would have triggered a severe reaction. They wanted to force your hand. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt him. He reminds me so much of my grandson." Before Robert could respond, his phone buzzed, a message from Officer Chen. The international task force they had secretly assembled was moving in on Sun Tech's offices in Singapore. Simultaneously, local authorities were surrounding James Sun's residence. "Ming Wei," Robert said softly, using her real name for the first time. "What you did was unforgivable. But right now, I need your help to make this right. Will you testify about everything? Help us dismantle this entire operation?" She straightened in her chair, years of deception falling away. "Yes," she said firmly. "For Tommy. For my grandson. For every person they've threatened and manipulated." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Police officers filled the house, collecting evidence and taking statements. Tommy, still weak but alert, watched wide-eyed as his beloved Mrs. Zhang was led away, not in handcuffs, but under protective custody. Robert had arranged for her to be treated as a cooperating witness, ensuring her grandson's safety in exchange for her testimony. As evening fell, Robert sat beside Tommy's bed, the room now cleared of all potentially contaminated items. "Dad," Tommy asked sleepily, "why did Mrs. Zhang have to go away?" Robert stroked his son's hair, noting how his color already looked better after just one day without the tampered medications. "Sometimes, buddy, good people make bad choices when they're scared. But what matters is that they find the courage to make things right." Through the window, the last rays of sunlight painted the autumn leaves in shades of gold and crimson. The security cameras still recorded silently, but now they watched over a house that was truly secure. In Singapore, James' son was being led out of his office in handcuffs. In Beijing, international agents were ensuring the safety of Ming Wei's grandson. Robert's phone buzzed one final time, a message from Dr. Patel confirming that Tommy's new treatment plan would begin tomorrow. Real healing could finally start. As he watched his son drift off to sleep, Robert reflected on how close they had come to disaster, and how sometimes the greatest dangers come disguised as the very things we trust most. The security footage from these past weeks would soon become evidence in an international corporate conspiracy case. But for now, it simply recorded a father watching over his sleeping son, both of them finally safe from the shadows that had threatened their world. The days following Ming Wei's revelation brought a symphony of autumn rain to the city, as if nature itself was washing away the remnants of deception. Inside the Chen residence, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The hidden cameras that had once captured betrayal now recorded the slow process of healing and restoration. Robert sat in his home office, surrounded by screens displaying various news reports. Tech giant Sun Industries CEO arrested in international conspiracy, read one headline. Another announced, corporate espionage scheme exposed, child's health used as leverage. He quickly minimized these windows as he heard Tommy's footsteps approaching. "Dad?" Tommy stood in the doorway, looking stronger than he had in weeks. The removal of the tampered medications had already begun to show positive effects. "Can we visit Mrs. Zhang? I miss her stories." The question pierced Robert's heart. How do you explain corporate espionage and coercion to a child who only knew his nanny as the kind lady who told him stories about brave dragons? "Come here, buddy," he said, patting the leather sofa beside him. As Tommy settled next to him, Robert noticed how his son's color had improved, how his breathing seemed easier. Dr. Patel's new treatment plan, free from interference, was working wonders. Mrs. Zhang, well, her real name is Ming Wei, she had to go away to help some other people who were in trouble, he explained carefully. Sometimes good people can be forced to do bad things when someone they love is in danger. Tommy absorbed this with the unique wisdom children sometimes possess. Like in her stories? When the dragon had to guard the evil wizard's castle because the wizard had captured his family? Robert smiled at the parallel, wondering if Ming Wei's stories had been her way of processing her own guilt. Something like that. She's helping the police now, making things right. Through the study window, a ray of sunlight broke through the rain clouds, creating a prism of colors across the room. The security cameras captured this moment, father and son on the sofa, surrounded by the warm glow of understanding and forgiveness. Later that afternoon, Officer Chen arrived with updates. In the kitchen, over cups of green tea, he shared the latest developments. Ming Wei's grandson is safe, he reported. International authorities extracted him from Beijing yesterday. They're both under protective custody now. And Sun Tech? Robert asked, watching the rain patterns on the kitchen window. The investigation has uncovered similar schemes across 3 continents. James Sun didn't just target your company, he had been using these tactics for years. Ming Wei's testimony is proving invaluable. She's identifying other operatives, other victims. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Patel, who had been making daily house calls to monitor Tommy's recovery. Her latest test results showed remarkable improvement. His immune system is rebounding faster than expected, she explained, spreading charts across the kitchen island. Children are remarkably resilient. As they discussed Tommy's recovery plan, Robert's phone buzzed with a message from his company's board of directors. The scandal had sent Sun Tech stock plummeting, while Robert's transparent handling of the situation had actually strengthened his company's position. The attempted takeover had backfired spectacularly. Evening brought a surprise visitor, Detective Liu from the International Task Force, carrying a small box. "We've cleared this," she explained, handing it to Robert. It was among Ming Wei's personal effects. She specifically asked that Tommy have it. Inside the box was a handmade storybook, illustrated with delicate watercolors. "The True Tales of the Brave Little Dragon," read the title. As Robert flipped through it, he realized that Ming Wei had been working on this for weeks, stories of courage, redemption, and the power of doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. "She wrote this for him," Detective Liu explained softly. "During the days when her conscience was fighting with her mission." The psychologists working with her say it was her way of processing her guilt, of trying to teach Tommy the lessons she wished she'd learned earlier. That night, as Robert read from the storybook to Tommy at bedtime, the security cameras captured a scene of healing. The stories were beautiful, teaching morality and courage without ever feeling preachy. The final story was about a dragon who had been forced to guard an evil wizard's castle but ultimately chose to help the people the wizard had imprisoned, even at great cost to himself. "Dad," Tommy said sleepily as Robert finished the last story, "do you think Mrs. Zhang's grandson likes dragon stories too?" The question caught Robert off guard. "I don't know, buddy. Maybe someday we'll find out." After Tommy fell asleep, Robert reviewed the security footage from the past weeks with new eyes. He watched scenes of Ming Wei reading to Tommy, teaching him, caring for him, genuine moments of connection interspersed with the darker acts she had been coerced to perform. The complexity of human nature had never been more apparent. In his study, Robert drafted 2 emails. The first was to his legal team, instructing them to ensure that Ming Wei and her grandson received proper protection and support in exchange for her cooperation. The second was to Ming Wei herself, delivered through proper channels. "Your actions caused great harm, but your courage in coming forward saved not just Tommy, but potentially many others. The storybook you created shows the person you truly are, someone who understands right from wrong, even when circumstances make those choices difficult. Tommy misses your stories. Perhaps someday, when all this is settled, you can tell him one last tale, the true story of a grandmother who found the courage to break free from those who would make her do harm, and in doing so, became the hero of her own story." The rain had stopped, and moonlight silvered the autumn leaves outside. The security cameras continued their vigilant watch, but now they recorded a house slowly returning to normal. In Tommy's room, the handmade storybook lay open on his bedside table, its pages illuminated by his night light, the watercolor dragon seeming to move in the gentle glow. Tomorrow would bring more developments in the case, more steps in Tommy's recovery, more pieces of the larger puzzle being solved. But for now, in the quiet of night, father and son slept peacefully, their home once again a sanctuary, their future bright with the promise of healing and renewal. 2 weeks after Ming Wei's revelation, the Chen residence bloomed with new life. The security cameras, still maintaining their silent watch, now captured scenes of genuine joy rather than calculated deception. Tommy's recovery had progressed remarkably, his natural resilience shining through once the harmful influences were removed. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, Robert received an unexpected call from Detective Liu. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice carrying a note of cautious optimism, "we have something you and Tommy might want to see." The investigation had uncovered a hidden cache of videos in Ming Wei's personal cloud storage, not evidence of wrongdoing, but rather private recordings she had made of Tommy's progress, intended originally for Sun Tech surveillance but transformed into something entirely different. The detective had them authenticated and cleared for viewing. Robert sat in his study, his finger hovering over the play button. The first video opened with Tommy in the garden, weeks ago, teaching Ming Wei about his mother's favorite flowers. "These are called peace roses," Tommy's voice rang clear through the speakers. "Mom said they bloom even when everything else in the garden is sleeping." The camera shook slightly, and Ming Wei's voice could be heard, thick with emotion. "Your mother sounds like she was very wise, Tommy. Tell me more about her." Through the recordings, a different story emerged. While Ming Wei had been following orders to document Tommy's declining health, she had also been capturing moments of pure connection, Tommy's impromptu piano performances, his excited explanations of science experiments, his quiet reflections about his mother. Each video was punctuated with Ming Wei's private thoughts, whispered in Mandarin after Tommy had left the room. "I cannot do this anymore," she had murmured in one recording, the camera focused on a family photo of Robert, Tommy, and Linda. "This child has already lost his mother. What kind of monster would take away his health too?" Robert watched the footage with tears in his eyes, the complexity of human nature unfolding before him. Even in her darkest deception, Ming Wei had been fighting an internal battle, documenting not just Tommy's orchestrated decline, but also his spirit, his resilience, his unwavering kindness. Later that day, Dr. Patel arrived for Tommy's checkup, bringing news that made Robert's heart soar. "His latest blood work is completely normal," she announced, spreading the results across the kitchen island. "Whatever compounds they were using have been fully cleared from his system. He's actually healthier now than he was before all this started." Tommy celebrated this news by asking to play in the garden, the same garden where Ming Wei had recorded those secret videos. Robert watched through the security cameras as his son explored the autumn flowers, stronger and more vibrant than he'd been in months. That evening, another development arrived via Officer Chen. The International Task Force had made significant progress in dismantling Sun Tech's network of corporate espionage. More importantly, they had uncovered something unexpected, a series of encrypted files showing that James Sun had been planning to use similar tactics against other families, other children. Ming Wei's cooperation didn't just save Tommy, Officer Chen explained, his usually stoic face showing genuine emotion. "She helped us prevent this from happening to dozens of other families. Her grandson is proud of her, you know. He understands why she finally chose to do the right thing." As if on cue, Robert's phone chimed with a secure message, a photograph of Ming Wei with her grandson in their safe location, both smiling cautiously at the camera. The boy, about Tommy's age, was holding a familiar-looking dragon toy. "Dad?" Tommy's voice came from the doorway. "Can I show you something?" Robert followed his son to his room, where Tommy pulled out Ming Wei's storybook. "I've been practicing reading the Chinese characters she taught me," he announced proudly, pointing to small notes in the margins. "Look, this one means courage, and this one means truth." The security cameras captured this moment. Father and son bent over the handmade book, Tommy's finger tracing the characters while Robert listened intently. It was a scene of healing, of growth, of wisdom gained through hardship. Later that night, Robert drafted another email to his legal team. The evidence from Ming Wei's videos, while heartbreaking, also showed her growing moral struggle. Combined with her cooperation and the lives she helped save, it painted a picture of redemption that couldn't be ignored. "I want to add an addendum to her immunity agreement," he wrote. "Once the case is fully resolved and it's deemed safe, I'd like to arrange for Tommy to meet her grandson. Not just for them, but for all of us. Sometimes the best way to heal is to create something new from the ashes of what was broken." The autumn wind whispered through the garden, stirring the peace roses that Linda had planted years ago. Inside, the security cameras recorded Tommy sleeping peacefully, Ming Wei's storybook open on his lap, its pages illuminated by the soft glow of his bedside lamp. On one page, a carefully painted dragon faced a choice between following orders and following his heart. In the margins, in delicate Chinese characters, Ming Wei had written, "The truth always finds its way into the light." Robert stood in his study, surrounded by screens showing different parts of his house. But instead of looking for threats, he now saw only possibilities, the possibility of healing, of forgiveness, of building something meaningful from the ruins of betrayal. The investigation was nearing its end, but the story of healing was just beginning. As moonlight painted silver patterns across the garden, Robert thought about the strange paths that life sometimes takes, how trust can be broken and rebuilt, how enemies can become allies, and how sometimes the deepest wounds lead to the most profound healing. Outside, a shooting star streaked across the autumn sky, captured by the external security cameras. In Tommy's room, the pages of Ming Wei's storybook rustled gently in the breeze from his open window, turning to the final illustration, a dragon and a young boy, walking together toward a rising sun, with Chinese characters beneath them that read, "Every ending is just another beginning in disguise." As winter approached, the Chen residence underwent a subtle transformation. The security cameras that had once captured darkness now witnessed the gentle unfolding of new beginnings. Frost patterns decorated the windows like delicate lace, and the morning sun cast rainbow prisms through the crystalline air. The investigation into Sun Tech had reached its final stages. James Sun and his conspirators faced multiple international charges, their elaborate network of corporate espionage completely dismantled. But within this victory lay a more personal story of redemption and healing. One morning, as snowflakes danced outside his study window, Robert received an unexpected package. Inside was a USB drive and a letter from Ming Wei, cleared by security and forwarded through proper channels. The letter, written in careful English, began, "There are some things Tommy should know, when you think he's ready to understand." The USB contained video diaries Ming Wei had recorded during her darkest moments of conflict. Robert watched them alone first, his heart heavy with the weight of her confessions. In one particularly moving entry, she spoke directly to the camera. "Today, Tommy asked me why his mother's roses bloom even in the cold. I told him it's because love is stronger than winter. The same way his love helped me find my way back to the truth." That afternoon, Tommy burst into his father's study with excitement. "Dad! Look what I made." He proudly displayed a school project, a family tree that branched in unexpected ways. Besides the photos of Robert and Linda, Tommy had added pictures of Dr. Patel, Officer Chen, and even a carefully drawn picture of Ming Wei and her grandson. "My teacher said family trees show who we're related to," Tommy explained, "but I think they should show all the people who help us grow." Robert studied the drawing, noting how Tommy had decorated the branches with tiny dragons, each one protecting a different part of the family. The security cameras captured this moment, father and son standing together, their shadows emerging on the study wall, discussing the true meaning of family and forgiveness. Later that day, Detective Liu arrived with groundbreaking news. The international task force had uncovered evidence that could completely exonerate Ming Wei of the most serious charges. Her cooperation didn't just help us stop Sun Tech, the detective explained, warming her hands around a cup of tea in the kitchen. It prevented similar schemes from targeting at least 20 other families worldwide. As if to underscore the magnitude of this revelation, snow began falling outside, transforming the garden into a winter wonderland. Through the kitchen window, they could see Tommy's peace roses, preserved under protective covers, their late blooms defying the cold just as his mother had predicted they would. That evening, Robert received another secure message, this time, a video call request from Ming Wei and her grandson, Li Wei. After careful consideration, he decided it was time for Tommy to be part of this conversation. The security cameras recorded the moment father and son sat down before the computer screen. When Ming Wei's face appeared, Tommy's eyes lit up with recognition. Beside her sat a boy his age, sharing his grandmother's gentle eyes and cautious smile. "Tommy," Ming Wei began, her voice trembling slightly, "this is my grandson, Li Wei. He has been reading your dragon stories." What followed was a conversation that transcended betrayal and forgiveness. The two boys, despite their language barrier, connected immediately over their shared love of dragons and stories. Li Wei showed Tommy his own drawings inspired by his grandmother's tales, while Tommy proudly displayed his family tree project. "Your grandson has your kindness," Robert observed quietly to Ming Wei while the boys chatted through a translation app. "Sometimes the best parts of ourselves live on in those we love." Ming Wei's eyes filled with tears. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that kindness," she replied. "What I did was unforgivable, but your son taught me that even the darkest heart can find its way back to the light." As the call ended, snow continued to fall outside, creating a peaceful blanket over the world. Tommy sat at his desk, already drawing a new picture, this time of two dragons, one protecting a garden of roses, the other watching over a distant city where another boy was drawing too. The security cameras, their lenses softened by the winter light, captured these moments of healing. In Tommy's room, Ming Wei's storybook lay open to a new page he had added himself, decorated with careful Chinese characters he had learned. "Some dragons guard treasures, but the bravest dragons guard the truth." That night, as Robert tucked Tommy into bed, his son asked a question that showed wisdom beyond his years. "Dad, do you think Mrs. Zhang, Ming Wei, was like the dragon in her stories? The one who had to choose between following orders and following his heart?" Robert sat on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. "I think sometimes people, like dragons, face difficult choices. What matters is that when she finally saw the truth, she chose to protect what was right, no matter the cost." Through the window, the snow had transformed their garden into a magical landscape. The security cameras caught the moonlight reflecting off the white expanse, creating a silver glow that seemed to pulse with possibility. Before leaving Tommy's room, Robert noticed a new addition to his son's family tree drawing, a carefully written Chinese character beneath each person's picture. When asked about their meaning, Tommy smiled sleepily. "Ming Wei taught me that one means protector, and the other means truth seeker. I think we need both to make a real family." As the house settled into winter's quiet embrace, the security cameras continued their watch, but their purpose had evolved. They no longer searched for threats but instead captured moments of grace, a father and son building a new kind of family, a garden sleeping beneath the snow, and the promise of spring waiting to bloom again. In his study, Robert added one final note to the case files: sometimes the greatest security comes not from cameras and locks, but from the courage to trust again, to forgive, and to believe in the power of transformation. Every ending, as Ming Wei wrote, is just another beginning in disguise. Spring arrived at the Chen residence like a watercolor painting coming to life. The security cameras, still maintaining their vigilant watch, captured the gradual transformation as winter's white canvas gave way to nature's vibrant palette. In the garden, Linda's peace roses had not only survived the frost but were preparing to bloom with unprecedented vigor. 1 year had passed since the revelation that had changed their lives forever. The morning sun streamed through the study windows as Robert reviewed the final report from the International Task Force. Sun Tech's empire of deception had been completely dismantled, its conspirators brought to justice. But more importantly, their exposure had led to sweeping reforms in corporate governance worldwide. "Dad!" Tommy's voice echoed through the house, filled with the energy that had returned to him fully in the months since his recovery. "Look what came in the mail." The package bore international postage stamps and had already been cleared by security. Inside was a handmade book, its cover decorated with intricate drawings of intertwined dragons. The title, written in both Chinese and English, read, "The Two Dragons, A Story of Truth and Healing." It was a collaboration between Tommy and Li Wei, Ming Wei's grandson. Over the past months, the boys had worked together via video calls, creating a story that blended their experiences into a tale of friendship and courage. Ming Wei had helped with the Chinese characters, while Tommy had inherited his mother's talent for watercolor illustrations. The security cameras captured the moment father and son sat together on the study's leather sofa, opening the book for the first time. The story told of two young dragons from different lands who discovered that their families were connected by an ancient promise to protect the truth. It was a children's tale on the surface, but beneath lay deeper themes of redemption, forgiveness, and the courage to choose right over wrong. Later that afternoon, Dr. Patel arrived for Tommy's final checkup. "I've never seen such a complete recovery," she remarked, reviewing his latest tests. "It's as if his body is making up for lost time, growing stronger than ever." Through the kitchen window, they could see the garden where Tommy had created a special project, a new rose bed planted in the shape of a dragon. The flowers were a unique variety, developed by crossing Linda's peace roses with seeds that Ming Wei had sent from her homeland. The resulting blooms would be both hardy and beautiful, a living symbol of resilience and renewal. As evening approached, Robert received a secure video call. Ming Wei's face appeared on the screen, more relaxed than they'd ever seen her. She was no longer in protective custody but had begun a new life, teaching children in a small coastal town where she and Li Wei could live safely. "The roses you sent are blooming," she told them, turning her camera to show a garden where the hybrid flowers flourished. Li Wei says they remind him of Tommy's smile. The boys took over the conversation then, chatting excitedly about their book and making plans for a sequel. Their friendship, born from the ashes of deception, had blossomed into something pure and true. The security cameras recorded Tommy's animated gestures as he described his dragon-shaped garden to his friend, while Li Wei showed off the Chinese calligraphy he was learning from his grandmother. After the call, Robert found Tommy in the garden, carefully tending to his roses. The security footage captured a poignant moment as his son looked up at the sky and asked, "Do you think Mom would be proud of our new family?" Robert knelt beside him, touching one of the rose buds gently. "Your mother believed in the power of beauty to heal all wounds. I think she would be very proud of how you've helped create something beautiful from something painful." That evening, a special delivery arrived from Detective Liu, the official closure report for their case. But mixed with the legal documents was something unexpected, a series of letters from families around the world. These were the people who had been saved from experiencing similar schemes thanks to Ming Wei's confession and Tommy's courage. The security cameras recorded Robert and Tommy reading these letters together in the study. Each one told a story of children who would never know the pain of being used as corporate pawns, of families who remained whole because the truth had come to light in time. As night fell, Tommy added these letters to his family tree project, which had grown to include branches representing all the lives they had touched and been touched by. The Chinese characters beneath each name now formed a poem about the strength found in unity and the power of choosing light over darkness. In his bedroom, Tommy placed the new book on his shelf beside Ming Wei's original dragon stories. The security cameras caught him pausing, then taking both books down and beginning to read them side by side, one telling the tale of a deception unveiled, the other celebrating the truth that had emerged from it. Robert stood in his study, surrounded by screens showing different views of their home. But these cameras no longer searched for threats, instead, they preserved memories of healing and growth. The garden roses glowed softly in the moonlight, their petals holding the promise of continued renewal. Before bed, Tommy made one final addition to his and Li Wei's book, an author's note written in carefully practiced Chinese characters, to all the dragons who guard the truth, and to those who help them find their way back to it. The security system hummed quietly, its lenses capturing the peace that had settled over the Chen residence. In the garden, the dragon-shaped rose bed seemed to come alive in the evening breeze, its flowers dancing like ancient creatures of legend. The hybrid blooms, strong and beautiful, stood as living proof that from the darkest soil, the most radiant flowers could grow. Robert made his final entry in the case journal: "The greatest security system isn't built from cameras and sensors, but from the bonds of truth and love that connect us. Every ending holds the seeds of a new beginning, and every truth, once revealed, has the power to bloom eternally like roses in spring." The cameras recorded one last scene as the day drew to a close, father and son standing in the garden, surrounded by flowers that represented both what they had lost and what they had gained. Above them, stars twinkled like distant dragons' eyes, watching over a world where truth had triumphed and healing had taken root, promising to flower for generations to come.